Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's very nice to see you all, especially the person who has the unusual name of Zoom user. I'm just looking at. I'm sure you're a very good Zoom user. Welcome to the Arthur Conan Doyle Center for another of our Tuesday talks. This is the last in this series. I'm just building up to Christmas now. And because I tend both to forget what to say at the end and believe that we ought to finish on time, I'm going to say now that I hope you all have a wonderful Christmas when it comes, and that I'm very glad that everybody who has been able to come tonight is representing all the many people we've had over the year and a half since lockdown was declared in Britain and we could no longer have lectures in the Arthur Conan Doyle Center. And since then, we've been having these Tuesday talks. And I was just saying to Joanne, who's here tonight, of course, and to Scott, our assistant, that we it worked out that I've just booked 72 of them going forward through to next July. And that's an awful lot of interesting speakers. And Joanne made the comment that it's pretty encouraging for people who think as we do, who are interested in things that we're interested in, that there are so many speakers. Presumably for every paid up speaker who knows about this stuff, there are tens or dozens or scores of people who would never come and speak, but read the books of those who do or wish to come to these things. And I think this might be part of that sea change that we're all hoping for. Anyway, tonight we are very lucky to have Joanne Helfrich back for another go. She came to us at the beginning, and she was then in the process of producing a book, which she has just produced. And may I tell you that it's both her birthday and she has given birth to a book very recently, like in the last 48 hours, and it's available, and she will tell us about it. And of course, she is one of the great channelers of our time, and she has very unusual channeling, as I'm sure most of you will remember. It's the very unusual channeling of the deceased. Obviously, that's who you channel. But many of these are famous people, famous authors in particular, and that's what she's going to talk about. So without more ado, there's only one thing I would like to do, just in case I forget it at the end. I have to tell you that this is Scott's last Zoom with us, last Tuesday talk with us. He's been with me for the last 18 months since the beginning, as most of you know. Scott is leaving us, and he is going to the United States of America, where I'm sure he will be an enormous success. And we wish him well. So I'd just like to get that in. Well, thank you very much for listening to me. And now let's hand over to Joanne for what she has to say tonight.
Thank you so much, Lance and Scott and everyone there who's made this possible. I'm just thrilled to be here today. It's an important day for me. Finally got the book out. It is available. So that's what I'll be talking about today is my new book, Afterlives, Firsthand Accounts of 20 Notable People. And now, last time I was here, I spoke about the process that produced it, which was a surprising process for me because I'd never done anything quite like it before. And today I'm going to be talking about the author's accounts themselves. So, and I will just go ahead and share my slides.
That looks pretty good.
Okay, great. That's not, let's see here. Okay, so here's the book. It's available now, thank goodness, finally, on Amazon, including Amazon UK and other places. Today, I'm going to be giving you just a little bit of background and then go into the author's accounts and main themes. And these are the ones I've chosen for this group. They're also themes that excite me very much. So they include the author's perceptions of divinity, the idea that consciousness is primary. They talk about areas of consciousness, that we go as we are, we create our own reality. They talk about healing and transcendence, greater selfhood, and a few predictions for what we can expect in our lifetimes. So just a little bit of background. I'm very influenced by the work of Jane Roberts, and she's seen here, she's channeling Seth, and her husband is in the foreground, Robert Butts, and he wrote down all the words. He transcribed the words in longhand, actually, or his own form of shorthand, I believe, and then typed them up and prepared them for publication. So they both had a lot to do with creating the Seth material. Jane didn't like the word channeling, but we use that because we know what that is. It works for us. With all apologies, Jane. From late 1963 until her death in 1984. These books, the Seth books, were instrumental in bringing the idea of channeling to a wide audience. Seth described himself as an energy, personality, essence, a vast collective energy, not a singular, but a collective energy. And there were over 40 books written by Seth and Jane on her own. The core ideas include the ideas that consciousness creates matter, that every individual creates their reality through their thoughts, beliefs, and expectations, emotions, and so on. And Seth continually encourages us to live up to our abilities of consciousness, which is very much what this group does and encourages. So this is one of the cartoons that I like to have in my presentations. It's by Dave Foley, and it's Speed Bump, and that's the name of his series. And he's in a lot of places, but his cartoons really speak to this content so beautifully well, I have to include them. And I think we need to have a light touch when dealing with these topics wherever possible. So Jane wrote 3 after-death journals, one about Rembrandt, one about Paul Cézanne, and the other about William James. So she was a huge influence on me, of course, and I began to channel Rose in 2007. And Rose describes herself similarly as Seth did. She describes herself as an energy, personality, essence. Also, she's a collective energy. And of course, there's no gender pronouns in that realm. So we're just going with she. And I later learned that I was able to speak with dead people, quite by accident, really. I just tried it and it happened. And that's a whole other story. So Jane Roberts actually came through and wrote the foreword to my book as well. I'm sorry, the introduction to my book, as well as the last chapter. And in the introduction, she describes the process. Now, I'm going to be reading a lot from the book because they are the author's accounts. So I'm going to have a lot of text on the page. You don't have to read it. You can just close your eyes if you'd like and listen to the words. So you can consider this maybe a lecture with cartoons, if that's helpful. So I'm going to go ahead and read Jane's text now on how she describes the process. The process of writing the Seth material and the Afterlife books was very similar to the situation in which Joanne is being helped by her own oversoul, or essence as we call it, and Rose, the sort of energy, personality, essence like Seth, who serves as the overseer. She has asked for our help, the committee of authors, as she calls us, and we help put things together for her. I also help with translations from others who have gone past their immediate after-death environment. Those that go beyond have already helped themselves heal from past traumas, relive some lives or experiences, then go on to other things, new lifetimes, for example. The way to view them, therefore, is as they were, in a kind of blueprint state that captures who they were when alive without needing update, in a sense. They are informed by the next level of consciousness. Therefore, the best information relating to each person is available with my help and others. I can't believe I'm now the one who's helping with the transmission, being on the other side of this complex process, as I was always the one in her shoes. So for me, this was a lovely endorsement by my hero, Jane Roberts, and just a wonderful part of the book that I'm happy to share. So here are all of the authors. They include Anthony Bourdain, chef and travel host, Hunter S. Thompson, who is a journalist and novelist. They're very similar to who they were when physical, I'll tell you that up front. Ayn Rand, novelist, Martin Luther King Jr., civil rights leader, Harriet Tubman, abolitionist and civil rights leader, John Barron, an unknown to me 16th century slave trader born in Scotland, as a matter of fact, Thomas Paine, an 18th century writer and revolutionary, helped create our America's split from Britain. Johann Goethe, 18th, 19th century writer, Albert Einstein, theoretical physicist, of course, Carl Jung, pioneer of psychoanalysis. Well, Freudians might argue with that. Hildegard von Bingen, a 12th century abbess and visionary. Paramahansa Yogananda, author and yogi. J.D. Salinger, author. George Harrison, of course, a Beatle, musician, producer. Authors Douglas Adams, James Baldwin, Kurt Vonnegut, Aldous Huxley, and Robin Williams, actor and comedian, and Jane Roberts, of course, author and psychic. So one of the first things I think I wondered when talking to people who have passed is, what is your impression of God, divinity, etc.? And one of the things that came up was Hunter S. Thompson early on in the book. He says, the framework is holy. That's what I've found so far. George Harrison. My perspective now embraces Godhood more than I was able to when physical. When I was physical, I had to continually remind myself that God was ever present. Now I don't need to. What I do now know is that he's infused in all of creation without needing to say mantras or do much of anything. Douglas Adams, who was an atheist, by the way, and still is, but we'll get to that. You don't need to believe in God to understand the full picture, that everybody who ever lived is connected in some way to everybody who ever lived. And in this, the spiritual dimension has to be included. That does not mean there's a God who sits on high judging everybody all the time. This means that he's us, period. And what matters is that we act like the blokes who want to bring goodness into the world, that's all. Because this is the point. To love really is the point. So the idea that consciousness is primary is an important one, I know, to all of us probably, or most of us. This from Albert Einstein. While the body has potentials that deem matter to be the most inviolate of particles in the universe, this was not ever my claim. The inviolate was always a matter of spirit, pardon the pun. Matter was never, therefore, the substrate of all things. When looking at the whole, the entirety of all things ever, you must first conclude that the reasons for all change in dimensions has to do foremost with there not being anything other than the universe in every single particle. Those particles are not real in the sense of matter. They are not even potentials. They are living beings brought about through the consciousness of one's soul. He continues, the strength of a consciousness pattern provokes, in a sense, particles to behave one way or another. The consciousness patterns are deep, wide, and universal. There is no disparity between these sets of patterns, although there is tone, which allows each its own sets of expressions within the revelation space they exist in. The way you might think about this is as another kind of particle that moves according to the permissions granted by the constructions they are therefore allowed to create. These will become atoms eventually in some types of construction. They will become another kind of atom in the similar worlds occupied by you in other dimensions, so you have a sense of familiarity when you experience those dimensions. They will reach into areas of exploration that don't require anybody to see them, that live for their own purposes. So that sense of familiarity, we might conjecture that that's what we take with us into our afterlife. So these areas of consciousness do require some kind of credentials to get into them, according to Hunter S. Thompson. He was a journalist, so he uses, it's so likely that he would use the term credentials to talk about these areas of consciousness, like press credentials, right? I had some kind of credentials to get to where I am now, he said. Now, Ayn Rand talks about them a little bit differently. Hers is the chapter that follows Hunter's, and she mentions Hunter, to my surprise. She says the access credentials that he mentions are like floors. I'm where he is now in some ways, not in other ways. This is drawing us together, this work you're doing. However, we're in different areas of consciousness. The areas of consciousness I'm in now are floors that reach through other floors into spaces of light and darkness, as well as tone, there's tone again, color, and other attributes not quite realized in earthly terms. These areas are inspired by our mental state, our spiritual state, our healing state. Each floor has multiple corridors that go on forever. The actual places are not this linear. They are more ideas that move one about in new ways all the time. Therefore, because of the chaos of this that I don't like very much, I've called this the protocol place. It extends forever too, so you can imagine why some individuals want to take some measure to live with some form. So in another part of the book, Ayn talks about how difficult the amount of chaos is for her in dealing with her new environment. And she talks about having to create protocols to help her through. And one of the protocol being that when she takes a step, that there's a floor there for her to step on. This is Albert Einstein again, talking about how he can be with us and in where he is now. Let me give you an example of how I can be in two places at the same time, there with you and here with only the non-physical reality I'm part of. Atoms have levity to them that you can't see when you're physical. They have depth to them that you can't see with your naked eye. They have so many characteristics that you can't see. For example, photons travel at the speed of light while they are particles, and at the speed of light when they are energy waves as well. In both of these forms, photons relay energy from alternating visible and non-visible dimensions that transpose upon each other the characteristics required for each dimension. The energy is conducted while keeping each dimension pristine according to the metrics and characteristics of that dimension. How can this be? When you understand the ways or permissions of universal order, you will get the sense about how something can be permitted only in some ways, then realized in that sense, while also realizing other permissions elsewhere. Do you understand? Everything has connection. Everything has relevance within its own set of circumstances. I have permissions that reach into your world now with the same way I did when I was physical. The permissions have many ways of being realized, through telepathy, through physical constructions, through tonal patterns that exist subatomically. So, as they mentioned, they're also here with us, right? And it's just so hard to think about, you know. And I just think this comic is so funny. Yeah, I'm here. I hear you. I'm right here, even though they're sitting down at the Ouija board. Jane Roberts says, "You're here now too with me. You're in the bigger space with your friends here too." Harriet Tubman, "This is how reality works. You know how I would sound because you are here with me in this timeless space too, not because you know from past experience what I might sound like." So she was trying to help me hear her singing. And I said, well, I know what you would sound like, so I can kind of guess, you know, how you would sound. And she said, no, you know that because you're here with me. You have this habit, being physical, of thinking that everything that you know is based on your experience of the past, but that's not really real here. You know this because you're picking up on it psychically, basically. I think the psychics here can identify with that. Martin Luther King Jr., the world here benefits the many who have gone beyond physical life. Your physical world too benefits because we are here with you in spite of what you may think sometimes. J.D. Salinger, you live here too. You exist in a state of otherness, of timeless unity. So you are here with us as much or more as we have proven that we are here with you. Robin Williams, yes, we're here with you all the time. Yes, you have gotten that from the other writers here. What you don't really get yet is that we don't play hide and seek. We're not there all the time. We're there all the time, whether you're undressed or not. We know this is a question you've had, so we'll address this now. The things you want to remember about a person aren't what they look like on the toilet or only wearing their underpants. The things you want to remember about people is that which transcends these common daily experiences that we don't have any interest in. Therefore, don't worry about these things when considering us near you. We're here remembering you as wonderful. And in remembering all of your strengths and different kinds of beauty, the rest falls away like your underpants, reaching the floor as you sit to do your business. Oh, God, it's funny. Here he is again. The facts of heaven are that you go as you primarily, and then you heal, then you become more than you. Anthony Bourdain, who, like Robin Williams, also committed suicide, says, afterwards, I was totally put off by what my body looked like when dead. I hadn't considered before that I would actually see myself. Hunter S. Thompson, who also committed suicide. I thought I might become non-physical, but I didn't know I would still be physical in the sense of my body really is my body. So there are sort of these seeming contradictions of they're in body, they're not in body, it's a different kind of body. I'm not exactly sure if I would be able to describe it, or if it's just so different of a body that, but it's like, I don't know. So it's different, but they seem to have a body anyway, at least right away. Jane Roberts says, I woke up in my body. Even though I was dead, I was still feeling in my body. Douglas Adams. I knew there was something to the afterlife only when I was in it, however, not before. The fact remained, there was some place I needed to go next. What was it? Then I was surprised to find that there were people I knew there who welcomed me. This sounds odd coming from a self-described goddamned atheist. However, this is what happened. Now, what I want to tell you is you can still be an atheist and believe in the afterlife. I was not going to see myself as anything except a rotting corpse until I was able to transcend the situation I found myself in, leaving my body in the locker room. When I was able to move forward in a sense, I found many tears of joy running down my face because I was allowed to be with those I loved who had already passed. There were tears of solace, joy, mirth. Everything that you can imagine was expressed in those moments. The reason I say this is emotion is key to humanness. We love emotions so much that we take them with us when we die. This is why I say we are human, which is what makes us eternal. Another theme is that we go as we are. Hunter S. Thompson, again, who is still a journalist, apparently. I'm still recovering as a war correspondent of the world and will have more to say from my bed here in the Galaxy Hotel. Thomas Paine, still emphatic. I did not want to go beyond this place when I died. I stayed here to do exactly this. I stood for the kinds of things you need now, the end of monarchy, oligarchy, and suppression of liberty. I stand for these things still. George Harrison. Here I'm doing what I did when physical. I'm eating, sleeping, having encounters with those of the opposite sex, and everything musical that I did when physical. I'm doing here too. Now there are brighter lights and more colors maybe. However, this is very much like my tripping feeling sense, a sort of non-physical world of love and precious thoughts that are mainly helping everybody around here. Precious thoughts of loving intention are always here, always precious, always fully wonderful. We create our own reality. Of course, Jane Roberts says here in this book too, and many of her others, you create your reality based on your beliefs. Albert Einstein. I have come to believe that the images you see are not exactly simply compressed matter or even the thinnest of wave energy. The images you see are exactly those that are not only permitted because there are permissions in your reality, but are also focused upon in your brains, then carried forth into your view. Your expectation of something happening, for example, collapses the wave function into material-like particles that are not really material at all. They are energy patterns that express themselves in your reality based on the permissions of your physical construction. Douglas Adams, the fact that you can see with your eyes has little to do with the brain. It has to do with the perceptions you have towards the thing you're witnessing. This is nothing new in your academic areas. I have my mind and I have some of the brain I had then, only now that brain is not physical and not in charge of anything except to control how I respond to things. The non-physical neocortex exists without anything much else. Logic is different now, as what I sense is there immediately because I'm including in my experience the deeply held beliefs that I have always had. These are not projected as much as continually uphold my reality. So I just want to, share a footnote that accompanies this section because I really tried to bring in other points of reference to help show a little bit more about this, the bigger story involved. So I'll read a little bit of that footnote, and you may already be aware of this. Physicist David Bohm proposed that like a hologram, each of us has the universe enfolded in us and projects it as our physical environment. So it's interesting that Douglas used the term projected before I found this quote that actually used the word projected on our physical environment. And this is still Bohm's thoughts distilled, since our experience doesn't depend solely on physical reality, and what we see doesn't depend solely on our physical brain, we take our hologram with us when we become non-physical. This corresponds with many esoteric teachings, including those of Krishnamurti, a collaborator of Bohm's, as well as Seth and Rose. So, of course, there's healing. And when we talk about healing, transcendence sort of follows in the way that they describe it. Anthony Bourdain said, I was unprepared for what would follow, a sort of movement, though I wasn't physical, so I wasn't really moving into a kind of rehab place. And this is consistent with Anthony's experience while physical, because he had a lot of problems with drugs. And I don't know if he was actually in a rehab place, but certainly I'm sure that was considered. Jane Roberts, I had to be awakened as I was sleeping. Those who woke me were angels, which I had imagined, of course, in my Catholic doctrines that I'd learned as a girl. The angels escorted me from my body into a kind of sanitarium, the old kind where you went to recover. The place was very enjoyable. There were doctors, nurses, and many kinds of other invalid types besides me who were caring and healing to be around. And Jane had terrible physical problems when she died. She was in a hospital for the year and a half before she passed with terrible arthritis and pain, and she couldn't move. Martin Luther King Jr., the path for many is to ensure that, foremost, the healing occurs. The incorporation of healing for my body, what I took with me, which was in many ways still feeling the effects of my physical reality, is what I have most benefited from. Harriet Tubman, Harriet Tubman, just wonderful. She said, "I died without sin. This helped the transition because I was able to abstain from many of the services that others were required to heal, then to move into new journeys. My physical journey had done that. I had done the work that was required of me before I died, that many who did not achieve or attempt what I did had to in order to move along the path set for them by their loving Father." So Harriet Tubman was really a saint. She was never, of course, categorized that way by the church, but she saved a lot of people's lives, and helped break the back of slavery in this country. So she was continually informed by spirit while she was physical, and I think that's why she says this. She also went on to say something that I think is really important to share, because her comment begs the question, their loving Father begs the question, is the loving Father a consistent experience for everyone? And no, it isn't. So this is what she said. She said, "I say Father because that's the God I had when I was physical. The mention of the word him is so you can see how very strong my faith was, so strong that he is still guiding me. That's not to say that somebody can have a mother God or a chicken God. The God you have is yours alone. Without him or her or it, this would not suffice this heaven. You will have a sense of your own kind of God. My God is still the Father, that's all." Martin Luther King Jr., "There are always people willing to achieve a sort of sainthood from the ashes of their physical lives. This happens here. This always happens here. If there are no other words to describe the ability for a saint to be born from sinner, it's this. The sinner has come to us out of his own jurisdiction and prudent association with goodness. In other words, each sinner has the ability as well as the primal urge towards goodness." So what happened after Dr. King and Mrs. Tubman delivered their chapters were so powerful and so potent with regard to slavery, inequity, the Black Lives Matter things that were happening at the time, that I was compelled to expand my idea about who should come in next. Up until this point, they had been authors or other figures that I had been thinking about. So I said to the committee, who, as Jane said, it was a group of them who I enlisted to help me just make sense of the flow of this book and so on. I said, I'd like to speak to someone who has the best information to share at this point in the book. And the person who came through was John Barron, who was born in the 1500s in Scotland. And he worked as a leatherer, but the economy was not good. And he was drafted by his English landlord to help with the slave trade, to become a slaver. And he committed terrible crimes in getting these people, poor people from Africa, to other places in the world. And he describes his afterlife as getting there and just still being himself and boasting about all his great achievements and what a great person he was. And he heard his words being echoed back to him. And the more he talked and the more he listened, the more he realized what a terrible person he had been. And then he says, it dawned upon me like a day broke through night that the experiences I had had would be forever beneficial if I could repent to do good, to learn from what I had done, to speak out, to share that I had not done well, that others might benefit. I took on the healing that was required. The punishment was not needed. I was punishing enough to myself. My inner life was sparked by something divine that told me that even the worst sinner can repent, and I did. I repented forever, it seemed, until one day I was able to not have to. I learned that doing goodness was my reward. I became a minister in another lifetime. I helped with the cause of the emancipation of slaves, too. I had a deep and abiding love for African Americans that I had caused so much harm to. I let go of my feelings of superiority. I had not any reason to do this except for the sheer necessity of saving my own soul from the fires of hell, the hell of my own sin, the hell of my own conscience. And in this I found true grace. I tell you, I cannot read that chapter without getting choked up, because here was someone who had the story to tell and had no one to share it with until I happened to ask. I didn't even know that he existed, right? So how many stories are out there like this? You know, it really makes you wonder. And what he said was, each soul needs a place to share their stories, you know, to share the benefit of what they'd learned. And he's one of them. And it's just one of the best chapters in the book. Now, we're also talking implicitly about greater selfhood and how we, well, Seth describes our evolving selfhood as nested Russian dolls. So this is just the perfect comic for this, isn't it? And so John Barron describes his connecting with his own greater selfhood in order to be a better person. And of course, Carl Jung says, you are many kinds of self. Robin Williams describes his immediate after-death environment this way: with my ability to channel the many kinds of personas through my own work, I was fit for doing the kind of integration of my parts in the soul sense to help me include more selfhood with a capital S than before. There were a lot of aspects to me. Each time I played a role in a movie, for example, some part of me was formed or shaped, and this became useful in my ability to include more soul, in a sense, after I became non-physical. James Baldwin talks about the ultimate selfhood. You're one body, you're one soul, and you're quite likely to appreciate life more when you discover this. So one of the things that Robin Williams talks about in his chapter 2, he calls himself the chairman of the board for the production of this book. And it's so funny because it's the second to the last chapter, and this big reveal, which I don't know if he's kidding or not, that he's been in charge of the whole thing the whole time. So this next section, he's referring to him saying that he's the chairman of the board. Okay. He says, I was a sensitive melancholic who was not ever really able to transcend the suffering of the world. This was me then, and it's me now. Why is it both now? Do you think that I would have abandoned this person because I've grown up to be the chairman of the board? No, that's the point here. I'm that way now too, only in another kind of realm where I have collected these wonderful attributes of selfhood. I can't be the chairman of the board without this sad little suicidal maniac who I was, and love now more than anything, perhaps. I'm more than him, yet I'm still him too. What would your requirements be for a chairman of the board who would guide this kind of things? Would you want them to be mean, cruel, or dishonest? No, you would want him to be like Robin was, kind, generous, suffering his own woes with dignity. He is and was somebody who you want in your corner. Therefore, he's also the chairman of the board. J.D. Salinger. This is about your own savior self coming to rescue you. This has been the most treacherous time on earth, perhaps. This terrible feud between people has taken too many lives, and too much harm has come to those who fight against those who oppress others. This is not going to end anytime soon. However, it will get better soon. The reason why it will get better soon is because you're allowing more of your greater, more non-physical aspects of yourselves to come through you so as to tend to your situations more easily and with less suffering. You have encouraged more selfhood by the very things you think about when you see yourselves as good. You allow more intentional actions. With each breath you take, you gain more love for self and the world. Do you see how the very things you're thinking now contribute to the beauty of the world? If you don't, you really should. Jane Roberts picks up on this too. We want you to let go of any ideas you have about saviors needing to be persecuted or to die suffering. These are not necessarily the ways to go if you will take on the idea of being a servant savior, not a heroic, damaging one, but a truly gifted, humble servant of the world. You don't need to die for your cause. You don't need to even give up your wealth. You only need to commit to doing everything you can to help the world, not at the expense of your own lives, but as providers of necessary things to others. Sacrifice will need to happen sometimes, but ultimately, you're better alive in the world than you are dead. And just a few predictions. There are actually a lot of predictions and a lot of advice that they give us because I asked them for it. And so here's one from one prediction from Kurt Vonnegut Jr. The people who are servants will, of course, be the ones who will be held in the highest esteem by those who know better. And you of all people should know what the deal is with yourself, because you have the servant mind in you too. You have the application of goodness and reason and articulation of the best kinds of ideas that you would ever want to see happen in the world. Goethe. Bring down the walls so as to feed and shelter everyone, and the acts of hospitality will create the kinds of cities you need to thrive in the next phase of your planet. The cities will be built around people eating food together. He talks a lot about this idea of the integrated form, combining science, art, and spirit into our designs going forward. Hildegard von Bingen. The future has more monasteries in it. The path for you may not go there. However, you will be the beneficiaries of these centers of community, these temples of love. They heal as well as nurture those around you. And she talks about, she built monasteries. They stood up to the patriarchy in the church, she and her fellow nuns, and they went off and they took what the funds that they had with them and their dowries, they were given, the dowries were given to the monks. They took their dowries with them and built their own monasteries and ran their own monasteries. And so she's a fantastic role model for all of us in these days. So she doesn't describe monasteries as a place where people go to be sad and isolated. Her monasteries back then, and the ones that she says she's willing into reality now, are really more nurturing centers for the community. And I think about all of the churches that were abandoned by the Catholic Church, at least here in this country, that wouldn't it be nice if they were maintained and turned into the kinds of centers of the community for healing and services and things like that, rather than being abandoned. And when I thought of that, I immediately thought about the Sir Arthur Conan Doyle Center in Edinburgh, because there it is. There's another center for lifting people up and supporting them in ways that in which they are underserved in other areas. So these are the kind of temples of love that the Hildegard's talking about. And also she talks about monastic paths for people who, again, aren't about not enjoying life, but to take on different paths of expression that we haven't known before. So this is my last slide. And I just want to share that this is the book. It's finally out. It's available on Amazon. Afterlives, Firsthand Accounts of 20 Notable People. It's on Amazon in the UK and everywhere, as far as I can tell. I haven't even gotten my copy yet. That's how new it is. So I had to have it done by this talk. And I keep readers up to date through my organization with Chris Johnson, who's also on this call, my husband, Paul Helfrich, through newworldview.com, and that's where you can sign up for our email list, where you will get information about my project and all of ours that we feel are really helping to benefit people, and perhaps you will take advantage of those also. And that concludes my talk.
You're on mute, Lance. Lance.
Sorry. Thank you very much, Joanne. Thank you, Scott. Yes, there I was babbling away and you couldn't hear anything. That was absolutely marvelous, and thank you. And you are pretty amazing, Joanne, because the suggestion was that you might finish at about 8:15, and guess what the time is? That's marvelous. Listen, there are a few things which perhaps could come in the chat. There are one or two which I will read out in a minute, or ask people to ask. But I'd just like to ask this. You've written the book, and this has been an ongoing project. It's taken you some time. Are you still doing it?
Am I still working on, am I still writing the book?
No, I mean, working on channeling, talking to these important people.
Well, not, that's kind of not an easy question to answer, because I'm not writing another book with them per se, but I feel that I have conversations with them now. I feel that I am in relationship with them now. I would say everyone is in relationship with them, except that I know mine, I sense mine. So that work continues, and I keep reading the book, and every time I read it, I get something else from them. So it's almost like it's still alive, that they're still talking to the reader as the reader's reading. That's my experience with it so far.
So
did that answer your question?
Well, yes, it does. And
Okay.
it's a rather good answer, because it implies a kind of intimacy between them, you, and anybody who reads the book.
Yes.
And of course, this is based on your idea. I mean, I'm not particularly psychic myself, but psychics and mediums and healers and channelers and so on are all very keen to say that, we all can do it, we all have it, What about those of us who are kind of bottom of the class? I mean, you really mean that everybody, even the people who don't give a toss about this stuff, are being guided? Or
Well, one thing that would help is to try to end the inner dialogue that we have about not being able to do it, or being, at the bottom of the barrel, that doesn't help. Right. So we want to encourage that in ourselves, and do the kind of practices, being in touch with our dreams, having a dream practice. That's a good way to nurture that intuitive self, and just continue to try it. I think probably, Lance, you have many, many more gifts than you're letting on also. So,
well, I have to say that I don't think many have flowered yet, but I do think that working in the Arthur Conan Doyle Center for a couple of years, I am more conscious of things happening. And I think you're right that practice makes perfect, or whatever. Listen, Scott, could you unmute Bob Steck, please? Because as usual, he has a couple of interesting questions. He can just ask them himself if he likes.
Hi, Joanne. Thank you for your talk. It was great. I was wondering, have you ever heard from Albert Einstein in particular, or any of the people you've talked to, that they are in contact with others, such as yourself, or other groups? That's part one of my question. I have an additional question, which is, have you ever been in contact with Sir Arthur Conan Doyle?
well, not that I remember. Of course, I would be honored, but we have Anne for that. She's the talent and friend of Sir Arthur. So no, not that I'm aware of. And regarding Albert Einstein, I imagine he's probably in touch with a lot of people and serves as an inspiration for a lot of scientists, especially. I have not engaged him outside of this, or asked him that question.
Okay. Well, I ask because last week we heard from someone I've worked with, Gary Schwartz, who with his research, has been working with Albert Einstein and
Right.
David Bohm for that matter. And it would be, interesting to hear from other channelers or mediums who may have heard from him and who reference other work that they're doing with others. It's a way of kind of cross validation.
That's right. I think that's valuable to do. And I might do that. I mean, I would work with someone probably to do that anyway, so that I would get the most value out of what I was asking, but I would be open to doing that kind of, I consider that research.
Great.
Yeah.
That's good, isn't it?
Please, be in contact with Gary if he works with great mediums and channelers, and I'm sure he would love to involve you in the research.
Great, thank you.
Scott, if you could just unmute Margot. I'm just going to ask a little question of Joanne, which must be in all our minds. I mean, do you initiate these contacts, Joanne? I mean, do they come to you or do you go to them?
Mostly I come to them. It's explained in the book, because it was sort of, I had to figure it out as I go along. But so, for example, when Anthony Bourdain died of suicide, I was horrified, and like many people, I wanted to talk to him. So I asked to speak to him, and I did. Months went by, and around 4 a.m., I had the weird experience of wanting to talk to Hunter S. Thompson. I think he was getting in touch with me. I think he was prompting me. And I don't think the book would have happened if it hadn't been for Hunter provoking that. I really think that point in the process, he was really instrumental. So he did that. But then when I sat down to talk to him, I asked to talk to him. I still wasn't sure if he would come through. And then it pretty much repeated that process throughout the book creation.
That's great. And sorry, I will let you in a moment, Margot, but just, it seems to me that coupled with John Barron, about whom none of us have ever heard, one person you might want to talk to and one you've never heard of, that shows the scope and breadth of it, doesn't it?
It really, really does. I was so, where did that inspiration come from for me? It makes you wonder, whose idea was it anyway? It may not have been mine to talk to John. I got it from somewhere else. That's the kind of selfhood that we are,
It's that expansion. Margot, would you want to ask your question?
Hi, Margot.
Oh, you need to be unmuted, I think.
I think she is unmuted.
Well, in that case, she's very good at
There
miming.
you are. There you are. Oh, I thought I heard you.
Can you hear me? No?
Yeah,
Yes.
I can hear you.
It's very, very quiet. Can you turn up?
I'm not sure. Right.
Oh, well, just get closer.
Don't see me. I'm curious as to how older souls are coming through, because I it's just from what I've learned recently. I thought they moved on after a while. Like why you don't get your great grandfather coming through to speak to you. It's only your grandfather. So I'm curious as to how people like Hildegard are still around to communicate.
Well, the way Jane Roberts describes it, is that they leave a blueprint of who they were, while the rest of them sort of evolves and moves on. So that linear way that we have of thinking about people being older or even old souls really doesn't, according to her, and so far in my experience so far, it just doesn't work that way. It's very more immediate. So yes, we go on, but part of us stays. And that part of us, can talk to people who are physical.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Yeah.
How would you respond to the suggestion, Joanne, that there's no time on the other side, or it's just completely different?
Well, yeah, it's different. And Einstein, he describes it as it's different, and there's also no time. There's different kinds of time. I don't have his chapter open in front of me, but it's yeah, it's that and more. It's no time and different kinds of time and more. Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm looking forward to other people asking questions if they'd like to, though they don't have to. But I just had another couple. One was, I was very taken by that Robin Williams thing about selfhood, because there's something on the other side to do with multiplicity, to do, as you've just said, perhaps with people existing simultaneously in different times, or as some people say, simultaneously in different lives, and it can all be simultaneous because there isn't much time. But he talks about sort of getting more selfhood, you know, kind of being more yourself, those sort of additions. I mean, it's a bit sort of Jungian idea about the integration or the sort of completion or, you know, integration of the self. Is that the kind of thing we're talking about? I mean, or is it that we all gradually become one?
Yeah.
I don't know. Selfhood sounds like I become more me.
All of the above. You know, there's selfhood with a small s and there's selfhood with a capital S, and we're both of them, you know, and these spiritual teachers encourage us to identify more with the capital S, self. So that we emulate those gods and goddesses that we want God and our goddess to be, right? Because we are that on some level, and ultimately, yes, we are one. Ken Wilber has a great way of describing it, and I think he's not alone in doing that. But there's this oneness, you know. There's kind of three basic layers of this godness. There's this oneness. There's the subtle realm. So there's the causal realm, sorry, that's the top oneness, the subtle realm, which is this realm in between that people kind of skip over, but mediums and psychics know about this, right? And our dream selves know about this. And then, you know, our everyday realm of life here on the planet, that's its own version of God. Also the gross realm, you could call it, which I think is not a nice word for it, but it's the physical word, incarnate ground being.
And this sounds a bit like, say, Hindus talking about, you know, Atman and Brahman, or, you know, soul and oversoul, or consciousness and higher consciousness. I mean, it's quite a big thing in many religions, mystic traditions, and so on, isn't it? It's as if we all know there's something else, and that is like us, only more than us. Back to that idea, I suppose.
Yes.
Yeah. It's quite extraordinary that it's Robin Williams. You know, there's something very tasty about that, isn't there? You know?
Well, you know, he talks about, one of my favorite quotes in the book is that, you know, here he was, this comedian knocking himself out to help people feel better and to laugh more. But he says, beware of the laughter sometimes, because a lot of times, like him, it's people who are really suffering and really putting aside their own suffering to help others. So so this is greater Robin talking about, so Robin wasn't just a gifted actor and comedian. He says, he was a goddamn savior. And I think that's the most poignant and profound part of the book, maybe, that we have people on this planet who do knock themselves out to help others the way he did. So, you know, but of course, in this mortal coil, we tend to have a lot of problems too, like he did. So that just adds to the poignancy, I think.
Certainly that. And it makes me feel that, I mean, just for a moment there, as you were speaking, I thought, remembering that he committed suicide and all that, maybe you shouldn't just knock yourself out, to use your phrase. Maybe you should have a more, however generous you want to be, a slightly more tempered view of generosity.
Yeah, like Jane said at the very end there, you know, she said, you don't have to die, you don't have to sacrifice too much, not even your wealth, just be the best person that you can be. You don't, you know, we have these ideas too of service versus our own selfishness and happiness and following our bliss. But really, our goal is to figure out a way to combine that service with our bliss. That's sort of what my purpose is helping people to do that. But we've been thinking about them as totally separate, but that's a mistake in our thinking, I think.
Well, that leads me straight on. Please, if anybody else wants to join in, please do stick up your hand or put something in the chat. But that leads me straight on to another thing, which I found very moving in this. And I'm sure I wasn't the only one. I don't know a lot about Harriet Tubman, but she was obviously a bit special. But her insistence, I mean, as it were, presumably having been challenged by having the old-fashioned, patriarchal father god, I feel that she was responding to that challenge. I love her answer. The God you have is yours alone. I mean, I find that really moving and really optimistic because, I suppose one way of describing people's searches is that they're, looking for the real thing or the right God or the true God or the real meaning and all that. But if mine's the one I've got, then I feel more at home with that and less desperately running around searching for somebody else's.
Yes. And, I'm reminded, and I think it was Robin Williams who said it. I'd have to check the source. He performed as, I think, the lion in the Benghazi zoo right after the takeover, and this poor suffering lion. And it's so moving to talk about. He talked about how, as far as he knows, he could go to heaven and God would be this beautiful lion.
Wow.
So we don't know. And certainly people connect with animals in nature, that way. And it stands to reason that that's an accurate portrayal of God, in our own lifetimes.
And I mean, since we're all limited, however much more sophisticated I think my idea of God is than a lion's idea of God, mine still isn't the right one in the sense that there's just a right one. Mine is still only limited me doing my thing.
That's right.
And that's pretty good, isn't it?
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah.
I just wanted you were very very polite. Well, I mean, let's face it, you can afford to be polite because Kurt Vonnegut, one of my favorite novelists, was extremely polite about you. So you passed it on. You were quite polite about places like the Arthur Conan Doyle Center and this Hildegard of Bingen, sort of saying there will be more monasteries. We all know that the last 50 years the monasteries of Europe have emptied.
Yeah.
So she does clearly mean something else. I'm not trying to pick up the last word in our title, which is center, but centers with a small c of something. That
Right.
Those centers are something else.
Yes, and yeah, she talks about they can even be your own home, so the garden, it isn't just, this work of fiction, it's where you find it, it's serving food, it's the same kind of practices that women were doing before this patriarchy sort of took over. I mean, I believe the first altars were tables, right? So that's the kind of sharing that they're talking about. Goethe talks about that also. And they complement each other really well. And they're both German, so maybe that has.
Well, that's interesting. Yes. I mean, I was very surprised that in modern France, which is very atheistic and socialistic and so on, and in many ways a good country, but some things less so. They have things called les restos du cœur, les restaurants du cœur, restaurants of the heart, and you discover that these sort of really quite materialist French culture produces a lot of people who pitch up and bring food and serve food and do this in the winter or to the poor or in the migrant areas, whatever it happens to be, really without much fuss. So it sort of bubbles up again, even in a pretty irreligious society. I mean, and I suppose part of the point of being spiritual is this, well, you don't have to be religious. You can be spiritual in that way too. So that's all quite hopeful. Listen, I'm going to read out a question here from Catherine, just because, it's a little bit longer. In terms of helping us in this earthly realm, how do transitioned human consciousness, sissies, like Robin, like Hildegard and so on, compare to the guardian angels and other divine spiritual helpers for us to call on? I would think the guardian angels would have the wiser and more compassionate perspectives and more power to help. What are your thoughts? You've got to set Robin Williams against a guardian angel.
Oh, well, I think he might be a guardian angel. His greater self, certainly. I mean, it's kind of relative, isn't it? He was a guardian angel to his loved ones, I'm sure, went on the earth. One of the things that Martin Luther King Jr. says is that he is in sort of a realm of angels now. So he, and we know that he subscribed to those Christian ideas about angels. So he's done some healing and he's gone on to the angelic realm. I don't know if there are any specific references to guardian angels, but that's a good question.
Because almost everything you say is like God. It's as if you have guardian angels.
Yeah, well, not just me, but and I've always been big on angels too. But they say, and I'm glad for the question. It's a great question because they don't use the term guardian angels, but they say, we're here to help you. Most of them, I would say, have something about, we're here to help you. You just need to ask us. You just need to let us. So yeah, I would say that they are guardian. This version of themselves that came through the book are guardian angels. And what's nice is that readers can sort of like, especially psychics will know what I'm talking about, tune into their tone, right, of who they were. And that's what it's all about. It's in fact, a couple of them, even in the presentation quotes that I use, talk about tone. Einstein talked about tone. I think Ayn Rand talked about tone. So it's tuning into their tone that we will help us develop our relationships with them if we choose to do that.
Yes. Clearly, I mean, you've come back to that a couple of times. Clearly, it's to a degree up to us to, I don't know, ask or get the tone right or tune in a bit or be open or things you do in meditation. Well, talking of that sort of thing, I mean, Kathleen Coliano has asked a question which I wanted to ask myself, the obvious one. I think I may have even begun it when you were last on one of these calls a couple of months ago. Could you speak about your process as a channel? Do you have spirit come through to you and record what they're saying, or do you capture their messages with automatic writing? Just the physical process, Joanne.
Right. So what I do is, well, I started out air typing. It comes through my fingers. And I'm not kinesthetically talented, but for this part I am. That lasted a few days before I went to auto typing in my channeling experience. So now almost everything that I do in writing is auto typing on the keyboard. Everything that I do in speaking sessions, I do auto typing my fingers, or else I just psychically get the words. So when I sit down to channel at a keyboard, which is the most efficient way to do it, because then it's already transcribed, right? You don't have to record a voice and then have someone transcribe it. I think about who I would like to come through. And also I'm very careful about my questions. The questions are really important. And the intention is really important with regard to why you're asking these questions and what the final result is going to be. George Harrison came through and said, I came through because you have the intention of helping people. You're not in this to be the guru. You're not here to make a lot of money. You are here to help people, and I can align with that. And that's how we found ourselves. So having the right intention has also been an important part of this. That's a little off your question, but physically, yeah, it's through my hands.
It is absolutely on the question, I think, because it's not just I don't think Kathleen, do you want to say anything more there? We could unmute you.
Hi, Kathleen.
Hi, Joanne. Thank you. I find the whole topic fascinating. I'm a channel also, so I do automatic writing. So I was just curious about your process, because each one of us, no doubt, has their own type of process. So thank you. You answered that perfectly. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Thanks for the question.
And it quite clearly, it is the question has the physical side, but it also has the mental side. What mentality you're supposed to get into, and so on. And I presume that that's not just for channeling, because I'm very keen on people who can understand other people, who open their ordinary minds, let alone their hearts and souls, to other people. People, you know, when you meet them, they feel a bit warm. They feel with you. They connect. All that must be part of the same thing. Just with ordinary human beings you meet in the street, you know, the ones who are easier to connect with.
Yes, and you know, I believe everyone channels. It's just a matter of finding out the way that we do it. Some people are more perceptive about other people's intentions and so on, like you were, I think, sort of describing there, Lance. Some people are athletes who get into the zone and perform these feats of unbelievable virtuosity and with their physical bodies. Some people are artists, visual artists, and some people are novelists. So yeah, and I think too that channelers such as us who do auto typing really hold up a reflective light to what novelists are. Who's writing what. So I believe that all the arts are inspired. Well, some arts are more inspired by others than others. But yeah, there are many, many ways that it can come through, as unique as each individual is. And I believe that finding that means of channeling is really the key to living happy lives, because then we can get work that we enjoy doing and we hopefully get paid for it fairly. And it's a very important thing to have.
Yes, of course. Scott, you couldn't unmute Catherine. I asked her previous question, but perhaps she'd like to ask this question herself. I don't know, Catherine, we can't actually see you. You don't have to ask it. I'll ask it if you prefer.
Is it Catherine with a K?
This is Catherine with a K and a RYN at the end,
I see.
as opposed to Kathleen, who has said her piece.
I think she said, I prefer you to ask.
Okay, if we want a different and more joyful experience from a human experience, in other words, our next life or whatever, in our next lifetime, is this something we can evolve towards naturally? Or can we choose this when we transition? Or how is this decided for when we transition from this specific time? I know that. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like Catherine might be asking about our readiness for transitioning. Yeah, I mean, that's such a great question. It might have to be my next book, because I'm interested in that too. One thing is, I think the book can really help allay our fears about the afterlife. And not just my book, of course, many other works like it. Anne Treherne's book is another great one. To allay our fears about the afterlife and not fear it so much. The Seth information goes into a lot more detail about what to expect in the afterlife. So that can
including our choice, because the specific question is about choices, whether we can do something here to make it better there, which I suppose is the traditional Christian question, and then the question whether we can do something there to make get a better life next time. I mean, I'm rather crude, but you understand what I say.
Yeah, I would follow the suggestions of the authors in the book. They are to be servant saviors, not overly sacrificing ones. Have fun, in your life. Don't worry so much. Call on greater self to help us. Call on them to help us, of course. We're always happy to do that. Be happy people. I think enjoy our lives while physical. That's something that I think it was Goethe who said, this is the best reality I've ever seen, and I've seen a lot. I've gone beyond even this environment that I'm speaking to you from to say your reality now is just incredible. Nature, the works of nature. So enjoy those, because you'll feel better when you're in nature. You'll connect more with spirit when you're in nature. I think that rings true for a lot of us who have been living cubicle lives and jobs and not getting out much, So there are a lot of those things that that come to mind when those are the things I'm doing anyway. I haven't done more work on that, but that certainly comes to mind as things that we can do. That might have to be my next book.
It sounds like it. I mean, The only thing that I would add there is something which we were talking about before. I mean, you never know the minute. I mean, I saw a chap on YouTube who was talking about, he's a very psychic, mediumistic guy, and he was talking about past lives. And he'd worked out that the reason he was back on the planet was in order to overcome his fear of public speaking. And you think, what about just sort of, kicking a football better? I mean, how basic can we get for these things? But maybe he was right. I mean, it doesn't all have to be presumably at the absolutely highest level, though it does seem there always has to be love. There always has to be some degree of unselfishness.
Yes, and George Harrison, who lived a beautiful, beautiful life. You know, I think we can all agree what we knew about him anyway. He talks about how one of the things that he needed to heal when he became non-physical was this idea that he wasn't safe. So he created a lot of problems while physical, not feeling safe even in his home. And in fact, he mentions the time that he was attacked by an intruder, and I think his wife hit the intruder over the head with a lamp or something, and George was wounded. And he said something to the effect of he was often trying to get out of the world because he didn't feel safe. And so one of the most healing things that he's been through has been to not be so worried about his own safety. And that's something that he had to confront. And so it sounded a lot like the kind of therapy that we can get while we're physical, you know, to let go of what isn't serving us anymore, to get the counseling that we need. You know, it sounds like those kinds of things are the things that they're doing. To your point, you know, it could be just public speaking and getting past. It isn't like you have to go out and we all have to go out and do public speaking, but we can let go of whatever fears that we need to about doing whatever that thing is that we fear so much, like letting go of that.
So like everybody else, you and your team agree that fear is the enemy, is the opposite of love, and is the thing to avoid.
My team, I love that. Yeah, moving from fear to love. One of the authors actually said those words, I think, moving from fear to love.
Sure. Yeah. I find the more you love, the less you fear. That's certainly true in the most banal level. Catherine's come back to ask, what about beings such as Hitler? A bit of a classic question. Do they transition quickly back into human form to remedy their past actions? And what's he up to now? I suppose you could ask him.
Yeah. Oh gosh, what a question. I don't know if I'd want to engage him, to be honest. Although everyone that came through are sort of a combination of their former selves and their greater selves that have been informed by this greater rose energy and so on. So that would be an interesting one. I could engage him in that way, the same way I engaged, of course, these other authors. But I imagine that he went through the same kind of healing that John Barron went through, and it was not pleasant at all, because he went into the hell of his own conscience, as John Barron describes it, because we have that affinity towards goodness, you know, and we know when we violated. And so he had a lot of reckoning to do when he got there, and a lot of healing too.
Sure. And of course, people in near-death experiences, when they have their life review, although it's not quite as painful as it might be, they do feel the effects of their bad actions from the perspective of the person whom they've hurt. And there were quite a few of those for poor old Adolf.
Yes.
It would have taken him some time to get through 6 million people saying, this is what it felt. I'll show you what it felt like. You know, I mean, I'm being very crude, but you know, one presumes it's a bit of a learning curve. I mean, Neil Donald Walsh in Conversations with God says, I mean, if it's God talking, says straight out, Hitler went to heaven. Now, you know, that's meant to be old-fashioned speak for what we're talking about now. I mean, they're not, these guys, you know, the people like you and Neil Donald Walsh, you're not really having hell, are you? I mean, the hell of your own conscience and all that, but you're not having like kind of eternal damnation by any stretch of the imagination, are you?
Well, according to the Seth information, we do create that when needed to experience that, but then that passes, you know, and those kind of pageants of that these angels put on for our own benefit to give us what we expect in the afterlife, but then that passes and we heal. And, you know, I mean, ultimately, we our greater selves feel compassion for what these poor souls are going through in their suffering through coming to terms with the, you know, the suffering that they caused. So that deserves our compassion also, right? So.
Sure. I mean, I find it, and perhaps it's the wrong thing to say, but I find it not very difficult to feel sorry for Hitler. I mean, of course, I feel sorry for all his victims. Who doesn't? Jesus. But you know, what a miserable end, what a miserable life, what a miserable consciousness there must be there. What horror he must have gone through to, you know, get to that point in the first place. So I suppose that's right, isn't it? Love the sin and hate the sinner, or it's the other way around, isn't it? Love the sinner, hate the sin.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, listen, I'm just sort of thinking of beginning to a close.
Sorry, Lance. I think
Scott, what would you
Chris
like?
Johnson has a question.
Let's have Chris Johnson's question.
If you unmute yourself there, Chris.
Right. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Over.
Yes, over.
I just wanted to add to that last part of the conversation about Hitler. In my estimation, and from my own readings of Seth material and a few other channeled sources, it's very easy for us to take it from the superficial layer of consciousness of humanity and what such evil, in inverted commas, people have done within the physical domain. But what we come to learn, particularly when we transition, is that there are other reasons as to why somebody adopts a particular lifetime style. And these are, if it's somebody that's labeled as evil, it's something that the collective consciousness of exemplified in this one particular individual. So it was a learning experience. Unfortunately, I don't think we've come out of the Second World War, if you like, and the things that Hitler did during that time. I don't think we've actually learned too well. But we're now coming to a stage in our evolution of consciousness where we are beginning to realize more what these people have represented from within the shadow of our collective psyche. A more recent person you might call as an example for us to really think about what this person has brought to us. I wouldn't call him evil, but the former US President Donald Trump, most people would say that he's not a particularly nice individual. If not, they might label him as an evil individual. But he had the characteristics within one individual that, in my estimation, were trying to show the collective psyche of the things we don't want within our psyche anymore.
Yes, that's very interesting. I mean, there are lessons to be learned, is your point. And there's a sort of Jungian collective.
Yes. There's always much more to learn from the negative side.
Yes.
From negative events, and negative people are always teaching us much more.
Joanne, do you want to react to that? I think it's very good.
It's a great answer and a great way to frame it, my partner, and I'll give you the $5 my Confederate.
Well, listen, that looks like a sort of sign-off moment for me, I think. Sorry.
I thought it was supposed to be $10.
Oh, that's right. I thought you'd forget. Great forgetting.
They're now having a private marital conversation. Sorry.
Well, no, he's not my married partner.
Oh, right.
He's my soul. Well, my other soul partner.
You don't have to go into it, Joanne. You've got the details.
No, we just say
we're probably married in another lifetime.
There you are.
We said not in this lifetime, alive.
Yeah,
not in this lifetime.
Well, look, that's a very charming way to come to the end of this wonderful talk, Joanne. People have been saying very nice things in the chat, and I think that was absolutely marvelous.
Thank you so much.
We really want to get your book and read about all these people, or read what they have to say, which is so fascinating.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the great questions and the great conversation. It's wonderful. I really have appreciated being here today with all of you.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Jan. We will be in touch. We must absolutely have you back, whether to hear more from your team on the other side or to find out how you are. And could I say to everybody, thank you for coming to the Tuesday Talks. And I hope everybody, well, it's a bit early, but I hope everybody has a wonderful winter, let's say, including Christmas and the New Year, and that we all get through it alive, or if not alive, happily on the other side. Would that do?
Amen.
Okay. Well, I'm going to
Thank
leave it there. Thank you, Scott, and thank you, everybody, and thank you, Joanne. That was great. And good night, as they say.
Thank you, Lance. Thank you,
Bye.
Scott. Bye-bye.
Bye.